Hello and welcome to DawnNews English. I am Areeba Fatima. Tensions between India and Pakistan have escalated dramatically following a series of missile strikes launched by India on Pakistani territory late last night. In response, Pakistan says it has retaliated with force, shooting down Indian fighter jets and targeting military posts along the line of control. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif addressed the parliament earlier today calling India's strike cowardly and baseless, claiming that they acted without any evidence, blaming Pakistan for April 22nd Pahalgam attack that killed 26 people. Pakistan's National Security Committee echoed their remarks, warning that India had once again ignited an inferno in the region. Tonight we take a closer look at how this crisis is unfolding on the ground, in the air, in the courts of law, across the internet and in the diplomatic corridors. Let's begin by breaking down the politics and power play shaping this crisis. For our first segment, we'll talk about the political response from Pakistan, how it came swiftly, both from the Prime Minister and the National Security Committee. But what message is this civil-military coordination trying to send? Is it aimed at international audiences, or is it more for the domestic front? To help us understand this, we spoke to senior journalist and political analyst Shahzeb Jillani. So Shahzeb, did you see this as a shock at all? Because it seemed as if you looked at the Indian media industry, they were preparing for war for a very long time, and very, very vehemently so.
We had been hearing from the government ministers, especially the defense minister, almost daily that an attack is imminent. Obviously, it's been 2 weeks since the attack in Indian occupied Kashmir, in which 26 tourists were killed. So this was expected, and Pakistan had been saying for a while that we are fully prepared. If there is a misadventure from India, we will respond. And it's kind of what we have seen overnight. The attacks by India were responded to according to Pakistan, and the Prime Minister in his address to the Parliament said we have shot down 5 Indian jets, including 3 Rafale aircrafts. Now this has not yet been substantiated. It is a claim that Pakistan's army spokesperson made last night, the information minister, and basically now the government is saying this is how we have responded, and this is how we promised to respond. So the speech that the Prime Minister made in the Parliament had basically 3 points. He said, we are capable of responding, and we have shown that capability. He again reached out to the opposition, Imran Khan's party, saying this is the time we need to put aside our differences. And he said, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was looking at international coverage, and invariably they are describing it as Indian retaliation to the April 22 terrorist attack in Pahalgam. That's interesting, because Pakistan is saying this is an attack, because we haven't attacked India, and Pakistan says, we have condemned that terrorism. We have asked for independent investigation by any country.
Multiple offers have been
multiple
made.
offers. So Pakistan's position is that this was an attack, and this was an act of aggression, and that is why Pakistan reserves every right to defend its territory and respond. But that's not how international media is looking at it. And they, in these things, it really depends, when you say this is a response or this is retaliation, how far back do you go? Yeah, he doesn't know the region's history, and he says all sorts of stuff. But we know for a fact that, it goes back at least 7 decades. And if you don't want to go that far back in history, at least it goes back to the time when Prime Minister Modi changed the status of Kashmir, as special status, Article 370, bifurcation. To a lot of people, that is the root cause. That's why Kashmiris are angry. Now, nobody's trying to justify the militant attack or the violence, but there are deep-rooted frustrations in Kashmir which India doesn't want to recognize, doesn't want to address. It wants to pretend that this is a place where there used to be terrorism and now there is tourism. Well, that has been proved wrong. And so Kashmir remains a centerpiece. Both India and Pakistan have to address it. And if they don't, this will keep happening. We will be at the same place every few years.
Definitely. But interestingly, for some reason, we can see a united front when it comes to civil-military leadership right now. And you have also pointed this out.
Well, the power sharing agreement of the current government and even the previous government, when Imran Khan was in power, when you are attacked from outside, you have no option but to close ranks. And in current atmosphere, the existential debate of civil-military imbalance in Pakistan goes to the side, because now it's about defense. Now it's about supporting your armed forces. Now it's about raising the morale. And if you see across party lines, even the opposition PTI, the problem which you are sort of hinting at is when the armed forces kind of go out of that domain and meddle in politics and judiciary and everything. That is our internal debate that we will continue to have, and there are all kinds of push and pull. But at the moment where we are today, the focus is very clear that the nation needs to stand together against aggression. I'm not saying we should contribute to war hysteria or disinformation or chest thumping, but yes, as a nation, if you are attacked by your neighbor, you have to put up a united front.
Definitely, and I feel that on some level this will be a good, some sort of like, maybe it would have like a healing touch to the kind of political instability we've been having these days, especially in terms of how the National Security Committee's role is. So now today when they have come out and given a statement as well, there's a very clear, coherent response that has been formulated. The international press has also just now begun to react to it. How do you read it? What do you think should be the biggest takeaway from this?
From the National Security
Committee
meeting, look, that is again civil military forum to decide on response, strategy and tactics. It does not include the opposition or the full political spectrum of the parliament. For that, things have to be discussed in parliament. Now, one place where I think the government has failed, that we can put aside our differences, we can fight our battles another day, but right now we do need to put a united front because your country is essentially under attack.
So I think another very interesting point was also how in the days leading up to this attack, Indian media was robust with all kinds of claims. They were talking about justifying ethnic cleansing, they were talking about justifying collective punishment, they were actually purposefully advocating for war, while simultaneously Pakistani media was basically putting in a lot of effort into showing that we are fine, we are not that stressed out. Now it seems like the tables might have turned a little bit, maybe we should be a little bit stressed out. What kind of strategy should newsrooms be following?
Well, look, as we say, the first casualty of war is the truth, right? And when hostilities break out, both sides try to promote their own point of view to rally the nation. There's a lot of disinformation, even right now. For example, our side has said we have shot down 5 jets, Indian jets. We have yet to get a confirmation. Like it said, we've shot down Pakistani jet. We said no, sorry. So they can create their own bubble and we can create our own bubble to satisfy our domestic audience, and these claims, counter claims will carry on. But for the public, it's hugely important to double check things, to be skeptical of official information, because in the fog of war, there's all sort of propaganda, and that we have to be mindful of. As far as our mainstream news channels are concerned, you know and I know that media is heavily controlled in Pakistan and in India. In India, it's the corporate media beholden to Modi machinery. In Pakistan, we know how the government tries to control, micromanage news channels, newspapers, and increasingly the digital space. Civilians have died on Pakistani side, and some civilians have died on the Indian Kashmiri side. Mind you, most of them are Muslims. So Pakistan is in a fix. When if Pakistan retaliates across the line of control, Muslim Kashmiris die on the other side. So while that is happening, I think as a nation, yes, we reserve the right to retaliate and our defense, but we should all be calling for de-escalation, for things to be resolved diplomatically, because this has gone on for far too long, and it has kept this entire region and millions in this region in poverty and destitution, because we are just not tired of playing these war games.
While diplomacy is important, what happens in the air can change the course of this conflict. Brigadier Dr. Raashid Janjua explains how India's strikes were not only illegal but also strategically flawed. He says Pakistan's Air Force, using J-100Cs, F-16s and a mix of long-range missiles, successfully countered India's Rafales and Su-30s. thanks to superior training, integration, and electronic warfare. This isn't just a numbers game. It's about tactics, it's about timing, and most importantly, it's about tech. Let's hear this detailed breakdown of what happened in the skies last night.
India's intent was very clear. They went about this whole thing in a very choreographed and planned manner. They ratcheted up the war hysteria and they were preparing the grounds for a attack. And they first launched information maneuver. And then last night they broke the deterrence stability by an unprovoked attack through their missiles, and those missiles were targeted against the civilian targets and mosques, which are places of worship. So this attack was dastardly, cowardly, and in contravention to international humanitarian law. I think we are qualitatively, I can say that our Air Force is superior, training wise, resolve wise, and the capacity wise. The electronics capacity, our BVR range capacity. So these PL-15 were used with J-10C, and AMRAAMs were used with F-16. So Pakistan has a mix, and Pakistan has very intelligently utilized these platforms using their best capacities. J-10C is comparable to Rafale in its capacities, very little difference. It's a single engine compared to Rafale, which is a twin engine. The missile range is nearly the same. It's the question of which pilot and which platform and which Air Force uses the weapons most effectively through its training, courage, and better tactics. So on those tactics front, utilization of these weapons, because range to range, the Meteor missile in Rafale and this PL-15 in J-10C, they are nearly equal. But you see the electronic warfare capacity of Pakistan Air Force, the support suite of electronics that Pakistani jets are served with, its radar capacity, air defense, that is very, very effective. So Pakistan Air Force's HQ-9 high-mad air defense missile system has shot down one of the fighters, and the rest was done by J and F-16. So range-wise and electronic capability-wise, and also training-wise, if you ask the comparison, the technical specs-wise, Indians and Pakistanis have nearly the same capabilities, but training-wise, utilization-wise, and marrying of doctrines and tactics.
So from what we've heard, Pakistan's military sees this not just as a response, but also as a show of strength meant to restore deterrence. But legality matters too. Was India even allowed to launch these strikes in international law? That's where we go next. In times of war, words like self-defense and preemptive strike get thrown around a lot. But under international law, those terms have very specific definitions. Talking to Rida Hussain, the host for DawnNews English's Case in Point, legal expert Ayesha Malik argues that India's actions violate both the UN Charter and the Geneva Conventions. She says India failed to provide evidence linking Pakistan to the Pahalgam attack and instead hit civilian sites like mosques, power plants that are under the protection of international law.
Now, again, there was no evidence, and US congressmen have also come out and said there was no strong evidence linking Pakistan to the cross-border terrorist attack which took place in Kashmir, and yet they claim that it is a cross-border terrorist attack in the sense of that Pakistan was involved in that. This, under international law, if you are going to use force in self-defense, it has to be attributable to a state and it has to be necessary and proportionate. On all three counts, India's actions violate the law relating to the use of force and violate the UN Charter in this. They could not attribute those actions to Pakistan. Under the Nicaragua case, the International Court of Justice has said that the test for attribution for the purposes of self-defense is incredibly high. It requires that a state send or have substantial involvement therein in terms of that group conducting the armed attack. So attribution, there was no attribution.
And in terms of the right to self-defense, what we're hearing from both sides of the border is a reference to Article 51 of the UN Charter. And as I understand it, for that article to engage, your use of force has to be in response to an attack. So when India is invoking Article 51, I really don't understand how they can say it's self-defense, because A, they're using force as a means of punishment. And to use laws to punish individuals and to punish civilians is unlawful and it's not self-defense. And you can't launch an attack under the guise of self-defense. You're launching an attack on another state and you're giving it the cover by saying, oh, actually, we're defending ourselves. So I don't understand how India has invoked Article 51. But we've also heard from the members of the Pakistan government and a press release, they've also referred to Article 51 of the UN Charter. And they've said that Pakistan has been subject to an armed attack. India has not denied it. India has admitted that it has attacked Pakistan. It can give it whatever cover it wants, but India has accepted that it has attacked Pakistan. So Pakistan has been subject to an armed attack. So Pakistan has also made reference to Article 51 of the UN Charter. So what are your thoughts on Pakistan now referring to this particular article and saying we reserve the right to defend ourselves against Indian aggression and what India has done?
So in terms of Article 51, it says that nothing in this provision prevents the inherent right of a state to respond to any armed attack committed against it. Now, India is alleging that it has been the victim of an armed attack and that armed attack allows it to use force in self-defense against Pakistani territory. And so the wording of that is very interesting to look at because it's based on a very controversial doctrine in international law, which is not accepted, called the unable and unwilling doctrine, which says that you can go into another state and target non-state actors, and that is why India has said we did not target Pakistani military installations, which undercuts their other claim that Pakistan is linked to this group, because then if it was, you would have the right to target Pakistani military installations, but you acknowledge you don't have that right, and you're going against this non-state actor under this very controversial doctrine in international law, which is not accepted under Article 51. So, and they've also used the language of preemptive strikes, that they think that there could be other strikes. The strike that happened in Pahalgam stopped in Pahalgam, and unless India shows that there is evidence of further strikes, it cannot allege preemption. Now, Pakistan has been victim of an armed attack. The reason India is saying that there is self-defense is because there is no self-defense to self-defense. But we know that India's claim to self-defense is completely unsubstantiated. What India has done is an act of aggression. They have committed an armed attack against Pakistan, and to that, we have the right to self-defense, we have the right to respond to the armed attack, and we have the right to deter future attacks from the aggressor.
So legally speaking, India may have overstepped, and Pakistan, if it responds, must be careful to stay within the bounds of international legal agreements. But even before missiles were fired, the battle had already started online. Digital rights advocate Farieha Aziz helps us unpack the disinformation war playing out in real time. She explains how state-aligned media and social platforms are being used to shape perception, drown out facts, and stir public sentiment. So wars are no longer fought with just weapons and tools, they're also fought with words and information being exchanged online. Today we have with us Farieha Aziz, who will talk to us about how this flow of information has been disrupted or reimagined in the context of war. Before we just dig into it, Farieha, why don't you discuss briefly how the narrative is being shaped in both India and Pakistan around the attack versus retaliation framework?
So, Areeba, in any conflict situation, right, it is a war of narratives.
Yeah.
He said, and this is something that we're seeing play out, right? There are claims, there are counterclaims. The challenge is also, and of course in real time, is playing out on social media, because that's where that's your primary source of information, whether it's official accounts on either side and in the countries, right? Or even if there are official pressers, most people will be watching them on YouTube, right? Nobody's switching on their television anymore. It's their phone, and it'll be, the internet that they're consuming all of this news. And again, beyond that, there is a lot of WhatsApp information that is circulating everywhere. But the question is, how do you then fact check? So there are state narratives, and they're conflicting. Then you have international media, which is trying to counteract and keep both sides there. But your official sources essentially are going to be government, or your forces that are putting out the narrative of what has happened, what are the casualties, and you can see that there's a discrepancy there, right, in terms of how many jets have been shot down, how many sites have been attacked, civilians,
whether the white flag was raised or not.
Right, and also the language in all of it gets couched in, right? So all of that is being contested. Then there's so your citizen approaches, right? And it was on vague sort of public order, national security, and this is very familiar to us, right? Of course, we've seen these requests, right? It happens. But then again, in a situation, and especially what we've seen play out, with the Gaza conflict and shadow banning and how social media platforms, who's going to decide whose narrative remains, whether on the global. Right now, we've seen geographically, Pakistani content has been banned or channels have been banned within India, right? But right now, if you have a counterclaim, right, that 3 jets or 5 jets or whatever, are you going to have a disclaimer with that piece of information that people are sharing? Is it going to lead to a geographical restriction? Are you going to have a removal? And who's going to decide that? On basis of what information, right?
I mean, it's just that with passing time, governments and states have so much greater control over what we used to think was a democratized information flow space called the internet. But with this time, when we have developed laws like PICA, they have also developed their own frameworks, and which is why it's even more difficult for this information to flow in a way that's actually democratic, where you can actually look at people who might present counter narratives. So within this context, we saw that people were surprisingly celebrating that Twitter was still on, and they were able to access what we now call X during the time of war, during the attack was happening. So how do you perceive that? And I mean, I really want you to focus on how the entire country has been begging for X to be unbanned for what seems like more than a year now, but suddenly it's turned on.
So it's not just about, oh, this is but the official. There are other people lending credence to that, right? And that works, right? And that is also important in terms of uncritical acceptance of state narratives, wherever they may be. But then again, how else do you get access to information? Physical access is also sometimes restricted, right? And so all of these things, and this is something we're seeing in India, right, where at the crash site, for instance, right, and suddenly it's sealed and you can't get access, and international media can't get access. So it's a lot of it, the truth is going to lie somewhere in between a counterclaim and a counterclaim. Somewhere the facts, will be buried, somewhere there.
And it would just get harder and harder to look for them when
absolutely.
these steps are taken. This also ties in very closely with the fact that state is obviously controlling media, but in the same space, there's a lot of people who are trying to put out good information there as well, acting as, you can say, independent digital media organization, independent YouTubers, but with India choosing to block every kind of influencer, social media person coming from Pakistan, this creates a particular landscape in India, especially where the media is so charged and they're advocating for war. But suddenly now we are in the war time. So it's looking like this disinformation is very closely tied to propaganda and advocacy for war. What are the most specific kinds of disinformation examples that you have seen in the night that we just experienced, and especially how do they stand out in terms of state narrative, and how do they either support or interact with it?
So again, in terms of, where we've had like where the attacks have happened, how many people have been killed. And again, the discrepancy between, the Pakistani narrative is that civilians have been killed, right? And India is saying, oh no, terrorists have been, terrorist hideouts, etc., or members. And again, like, who's going to then verify that? There's a lot of information going around about Masood Azhar, but you don't know at this point, right, or his family. And so how are you going to check those claims in absent like any official? And then again, where's that third party verification? Similarly, what was happening, I mean, as things are developing yesterday, we could see a lot of hysteria generally, right? Oh, Karachi airport is being evacuated, or there are going to be strikes over there.
There's some kind of a fire there.
Right, and so sometimes and oftentimes on social media you see, right? Old pictures, old videos are then attributed to something that's happening. Then of course, those are the more, I would feel like that's still easier to check because of the tech tools. But it's the narrative claims, right? Like, how do you possibly now go and check those? And again, the sense of apprehension. So of course, there was that warning that something will happen within 48 hours or 24 hours, right? And something has happened, and you don't know whether it's going to, because the chest thumping, the narrative, some people.
And I mean, in a bipartisan situation such as this, people usually rely on international outlets to step in, intervene where necessary, and perhaps investigate. But ever since 7th October, we have seen that people have generally lost trust in international media outlets. People generally don't believe that they have the capacity to continue the pursuit of truth, essentially, which seems like the case here as well. We don't see any impressive coverage coming from any international media outlet which is trying to sort the fact from fiction. So in this context, do you have any hope? How do people reach the truth, and what do you think people should do in terms of the way they perceive and conceive and consume social media? How do they consume social media in a more responsible way to actually get to the truth, or closer to the truth perhaps, even if we are all struggling in figuring out what actually happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes maybe we will never know also, because either country is not going to fully disclose to you, right? The level of whether it was preparedness, what happened, because that is a layer of gray that you require to build your narratives as well, right? And so that is going to, in terms of statecraft, and there's been all of this about this technology, that technology, Chinese technology trumping all of this. So there's going to be a lot of this that we will see. We're not going to be able to sift through everything, right? But what is driving responses? This is not also an overnight sort of response just in this situation. There's history, there's baggage with all of this, right? So everything sort of coalesces when such a situation happens, and so that's why you see responses and reactions in that manner, right? And you mentioned October 7th, and that essentially is also brought out. Of course, there is that too, but then somewhere in between those are where you're getting accounts, right? From Gaza, that's where you're getting accounts. But then what happens? Shadow banning or other restrictions, right? Whose view, and especially for social media, whose view is going to prevail? And again, what they say about history as well, it's written by, so again, in social media in real time, this is what's happening. It's about hegemony, right, on information and speech, and that's essentially the battle that we're seeing play out. So I mean, irrespective of what is happening, right now the narrative war is about who's going to be able to drown out the other, establish their narrative, because narratives are really driving everything in the situation.
Yeah, and as we see, the big tech is not actually moving away from collaborating with states, they're moving closer towards collaborating with states. Maybe perhaps this was not the case 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but it's totally different right now.
And you say 5 years ago, I recall I'd written something titled An Internet with Borders, right? And it was particularly, like you said, the democratization. We envisage the internet as a democratizing space where you could have alternate perspectives, etc. But more and more, as we've seen, this whole geographical restriction, companies localizing, registering in jurisdictions, laws applying, compliance with governments, stakes, corporate stakes.
The ability to show. So moving on, we feel that obviously this war is also a war of information and words, and it's only going to get worse. This war of narratives, with narratives clashing against each other, we don't know who's going to set it straight, but we'll try our best to. So while missiles may hit their mark, misinformation often hits harder, muddying facts and making diplomacy even more difficult. Speaking of diplomacy, let's turn to the global stage next. With two nuclear powers trading fire, the world is watching closely. Former Ambassador Dr. Maleeha Lodhi believes international actors, particularly the United States of America, may soon intervene to de-escalate the situation. But she warns that Pakistan must act clearly and decisively to avoid letting India set a very dangerous new precedent of cross-border strikes. She also raises concerns about the growing normalization of these actions, especially in a region as volatile as South Asia. A sobering reminder that escalation here doesn't just threaten two countries, it threatens regional stability, especially in a nuclear context.
This is a very serious crisis which has been brought on by the Indian aggression. India's attack at different places in mainland Pakistan, in addition to places in Kashmir, Azad Kashmir, has obviously escalated the situation. Pakistan's response has been very restrained. Yes, it has downed 5 Indian aircraft. It has also taken action against Indian posts on the line of control. But generally speaking, even before India's aggression, Pakistan has acted with great calmness and with restraint. But clearly, that restraint is now being tested by the fact that India has not only attacked Pakistan, but 26 civilian lives have been lost in this attack. Civilians were targeted, and that has created anger across the country, which will compel Pakistan to act. Already, after the meeting of the National Security Committee, Pakistan has said it will act, and it has given the military the power to decide when and how to do that. So I think the situation remains very fraught, and we will have to see in the coming days the nature of Pakistan's response, and then how India responds to that. So it is unclear at this point in time whether major escalation can be avoided, but there is diplomacy going on behind the scenes. The United States is certainly involved. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has been on the phone after the Indian attack. He spoke to Indian officials and to Pakistani officials. And I think it is trying very hard to see how it can diffuse this crisis. But I think the next step is going to come from Pakistan, because it's important for Pakistan, at least that's how the thinking goes, to re-establish deterrence. Every so many years, India attacks Pakistan, sends its aircraft across the border, or it lobs missiles across the border. And in that situation, naturally, Pakistan is concerned that this can create the new normal. And it is that Pakistan wants to counter in the response that is likely to come in the days to come. The fact that India also attacked a hydropower project on the Neelam Valley shows the kind of aims that India has, because it is not just to inflict temporary pain on Pakistan. It is to also inflict long-term damage. Already, its suspension of the Indus Water Treaties shows that it wants to really pose a threat that Pakistan has already said it will deem as an act of war if India was to stop or divert the waters that clearly belong to Pakistan. So we are in a very dangerous situation. I think the greatest risk is that escalation can become uncontrolled. There could be miscalculation by one or both sides. This is, after all, a situation, a standoff or a confrontation rather, between two nuclear neighbors. So there is clearly a need for the temperature to come down. And I think after this crisis is over, for the two countries to establish or re-establish and resume some form of dialogue, be it a back channel, but it's important because every so many years for the two countries to get into a crisis, this after all is the fifth crisis in the last 20, 25 years. So every 3 years or 2 years, if the two countries are locked in this crisis, that really is a situation that needs to be addressed.
So here's where we are. India launched a strike it calls self-defense. Pakistan calls it aggression. Legal experts say India acted unlawfully. Military analysts say Pakistan responded with strength. Diplomats warn of dangerous escalation, and the economy, like the people, is already feeling the pressure. Whether this becomes a turning point or another dangerous cycle will depend on what the two countries decide to do next. That's all from us tonight. I'm Areeba Fatima. Thanks for watching Dawn News English. Stay informed, stay safe, and a good night.